Hi team, welcome to the Program Manager First Tech Training for the year. My name is Emily. I am a curriculum lead in New York, and I just wanted to introduce myself and let you see exactly who you're dealing with for the rest of this webinar. We're going to be going over platforms and portfolio. If you're a returning volunteer, some of this might be a review, but it's still super important that you go through it because we've changed some things, and we're all a little rusty after not really looking at this over the summer. If you're a brand new program manager, welcome, and I'm excited to teach you about the platforms that we use in our fellowship classes and to get you started on our first project. All right, so I am going to get into it. I'm going to close this out. Cool. So today I'm going to be talking about Repl.it, which is a new coding platform that's introduced in fellowship, introducing the portfolio project that you'll be working on, and introducing Gitpod. Starting with Repl.it. Repl.it is very much like a slightly more advanced pop code. Why we use it is because it has fewer early learner scaffolds. So pop code was developed for CodeNation by one of our volunteers, and it kind of has every feature that we would like. But as our students become more advanced coders, we want to make sure to give them a little bit more independence because the platforms that they'll use as they become professional coders will have none of these things built in. So for example, the error messages in pop code are super specific. This is not necessarily true in Repl.it. It still does have the learning management features that we want. So for example, it has the ability to create a classroom, to add students and teachers to it, and to have assignments, have due dates, and things like that. It also has auto grading. So it's super easy for students to tell actually before they submit something if they have gotten it all right, and for volunteers to see who has attempted and completed assignments, and for volunteers to write in and send back feedback to students. And it also has this community and resources where people share different assignments, and you can use them for your own classes. So it's introduced in DevLab right before fellowship, and students will complete their portfolio project in it, so you will as well. It's also used every time pop code would normally be used in intro. So in the fellowship classes, it's used for the do now, the guided and independent practice, and for homeworks. So let's jump into it. So the first thing you'll have to do if you haven't already is sign up for a Repl.it account. You can do that by clicking this GitHub button and connecting it to your GitHub account. If you didn't, that's also okay. And what I'd like you to do is join this DevLab 2019 classroom. A quick note that you will probably be in Repl.it as both a teacher and a student. You can toggle between those by using this dropdown and seeing this teacher-student thing. Sometimes it's also over here. You'll want to be familiar with the student view so that you can help out students and see what they'll be seeing, and also a teacher so that you can manage the classroom and also help your volunteers take a look at student work. So I am going to go into my Repl.it. And like I said, toggle into that student view because we're going to be looking at this DevLab 1920 class at students. So as a student, you'll see all of the assignments are here. There are 5 for DevLab and then some projects that we'll talk about later. I'm going to click into this DL1 Repl.it practice. And if you take a look at it, the first thing you'll see is that the instructions are on the right side, not that big of a deal. You'll see that HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are all in different tabs, so kind of like pop code, but not cascading. When you want to see the preview of your site, it's going to be at the bottom in results. And then here's your console right here if you're ever console logging anything. In order to view the actual code, you have to click this run button. Otherwise, nothing will show up, but nothing shows up now anyways because we haven't coded anything yet. You'll also notice that in the HTML file, there's like a couple more lines of code in here than are usually in pop code. So I actually want to talk about these really quickly before we actually complete this assignment. So these extra lines of code are linking actually the code together. So most coding editors put different coding languages and completely different files. We actually do this in pop code as well because we have like the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in those different little tabs. But pop code automatically links those together, and in Repl.it and Gitpod and other coding environments, it actually requires the user to manually link these files together yourself. Otherwise, your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript won't be able to talk to each other. So the same way that you create a class in HTML and then you reference it in CSS or you reference it in JavaScript, HTML will not know what you're talking about if you don't tell the HTML to look at that CSS file or to look at that JavaScript file, and then your code won't work. So if students say they wrote code and you are looking and there aren't syntax problems, the problem might be that they just haven't linked their code together because this is not something they've had to do before the fellowship class. This also allows us to link the same CSS and JavaScript file to multiple pages. So if you take a look at a multi-page website like YouTube or Amazon, you know how like the top of the bar, like the top bar always stays the same or the sidebar always stays the same. That's probably because they might be using the same CSS file. So that's why like the color doesn't change, the font size doesn't change, because they're using the same CSS and JavaScript files. Okay, so in order to do this, the first thing you need to do is link your CSS file. This happens in the head of the HTML, so where the title is, where like any Google fonts might be. You're going to add this line of code here. Notice that we are calling it a style sheet, right? CSS style, and then your href, just like a tag, just like a link. You're going to put the file name. Most people call their CSS file style.css, so you're going to put it here. I think Repl.it called it index.css, so as long as it matches, doesn't really matter. That's going to go in your head. When you link your JavaScript, you're going to link that at the bottom of your body, so right before the closing body tag, and you're going to see that we're going to call it a script, src, like an image, and then again, the file name. Most people call their JavaScript file script.js, but again, Repl.it calls it index.js. And then one other thing that we have to make sure that we're linking is jQuery. So in popcode, there's like that little drop down and we click enable jQuery, and that's how you link jQuery. You actually have to link it with a line of code in Repl.it and Gitpod. So you're going to copy and paste this code in. You can actually Google it to find it, just like jQuery file. It's got to go before your script file because we want jQuery to load before your file or none of your click handlers will work. If you are returning PM, you'll see this Google API, so you'll see that we're actually calling this from Google. If you find that like it doesn't have Google in here, there's actually lots of different jQuery libraries like different sites have, but this is the one that we use most frequently at Code Nation. And it just goes in at the bottom of your body tag again. So here's an example here. If you ever want to reference this, you'll see the CSS, you'll see jQuery, you'll see JavaScript. In our Repl.it practice, you'll see here, right, our index.css right there, our Google API jQuery, and our index.js. All right, so now that we've learned a little bit about linking, let's do some coding. So I want you to practice opening assignments, running your code, running your tests, and submitting assignments in Repl.it. So we're going to open DL1 Repl.it practice, and let's do task 1 together before I send you to do tasks 2 and 3. So if we take a look at task 1, it says HTML, so I know I'm in my HTML here. Create an H1 tag with the text think. So I am going to create that H1 tag. Notice that it's self-closing, which is pretty nice. And I'm going to write the word think in it. So notice that nothing has shown up yet. So I'm going to click run. There we go. See the word think. If I'm not sure if I got it right, I can click this drop down and click run tests. And Repl.it is going to tell me that I got the HTML question correct. I want you to note that like if I put hello in here and then run this test, note that it shows it's incorrect. It will even show that it's incorrect if I type in think like this, because it specifically wants it to be uppercase think. If you get it wrong, you can actually click it, and sometimes there's information about why, and it actually says expected think to be think. So we got to be really careful about our syntax. All right, we got that right. All right, so at this point, I would like for you to pause the video and try out 2 and 3 on your own. If you are a new PM, you may not have gotten to the JavaScript unit yet, which is totally fine. If you want to try it on your own anyways, great. If not, as soon as you unpause the video, I'm going to go over the answers. So pause the video now, see what you can do. All right, I'm going to assume you're back with tasks 2 and 3 done. So let's go over this really quickly so that we can go on to Gitpod. So we finished think. The next thing we're going to do in CSS is change the color of H1 to red. So I'm going to type in H1, right? I don't need a dot or a hashtag because it's not a class or ID. Again, really like the self-closing syntax. I'm going to type in color, red. Let's run this. I've got that capital letter T in red. Check the test. Awesome. Doing great so far. And then if we head into task 3 in JavaScript, when you click the H1, change the text to different. So I know that I need a click handler here. So I'm going to create my click handler dot click function. Open this up, close it. All right, so I want to click the H1, so I'm going to put this here, right? I'm clicking that on that H1, change the text to different. So I want the text to change. Text. All right, and I want it to change to different. So I want the H1 to change. I'm going to put H1 here. And then I want the text to change to different. I'm going to put that here. Run it. I'm going to click this. Change to different, run my tasks, and I'm all done. So now that I'm all done, I'm going to click the submit button, and it's going to show that I passed all the tests, and I can click submit. I want to show you that if I didn't get this right, so let's say I forgot here, this doesn't work. And then if I try and submit it, it's going to say that my tests failed, and do I want to submit anyways? So students can submit when it's wrong, but hopefully they're going to want to fix it. If they can't figure it out, it's good for them to submit anyways. So let me fix this. I can check in my console. Oh, I don't know. My console's mad at me. So I'm going to fix this. Submit. And click submit. And I am submitted. Notice that you can also unsubmit your Repl.it. So if a student submits an assignment by mistake, they can always go back to it. But if I go back to the class, oops, here we go, student, I will see that my assignment is completed. All right. All right, so now I want to go and explain the independent practice, which you do not need to do right at this moment. It is actually due on Friday, August 16th. So in the DevLab Repl.it classroom, you're going to go down to the projects. There's 3 options for starter code, and you can choose any of them. You do not need to complete all 3 of them. And you're responsible for updating just the HTML and CSS to create a portfolio that represents you. If you want to add some JavaScript, go for it, but you're only responsible for the HTML and CSS. So if I go back to my Repl.it classroom, right, this is DevLab 1920. I've got my assignments. I've completed this practice. I've got 3 projects here. If I click into the first one, this is the starter code. I've changed a little bit for when I led DevLab, but if I click run, here's my preview right here. This looks a little bit more similar to Popcode, and you'll see that I started updating it. So if you pick this one, you're just going to continue updating it, right? Your name, links, picture. If you don't like this one, you can go into the second one. Same deal, we've got some starter code. All right, change this. Add these images, your resume, work. You can check out some starter CSS. JavaScript is empty. And when you are done and you feel really good about your portfolio before August 16th, you're going to take this link right here and you're going to, well, you can open it into a new tab. And then you're going to take this, you're going to copy it, and you're going to paste this link into Google Classroom in order to submit so we can take a look at it. All right. So there are some office hours Tuesday, August 13th, or you can always Slack or talk to me or Carolyn if you have any questions about this project, if you're stuck on anything, or if you want to show off what you've done. All right, I've also got a couple examples here that I can send out with the slides if you're curious what some of our students have done. All right, last section. I want to quickly talk about Gitpod. So if you are a returning PM, Gitpod will be used instead of Cloud9. If you hear students talking about Cloud9, they're talking about an old coding platform that we used last year, but Gitpod is what we're using this year. Why? Because it allows us to make multi-page websites, unlike Popcode, where you can only make one website and then link to external sites. It's got a terminal, which you can use to write code straight into that. I'll show you the terminal. It also makes it really easy to share code and collaborate. It's really easy with Gitpod to actually fork a project, which I'll show you how to do, and also to have a actually hosted page that you can share with your family, with your friends. And it's also easy to work together. So if you want to have a group project, in Popcode, you would have to actually pass the computer back and forth. In Gitpod, you can actually have multiple people on the same site, which is great. And it's way more professional. It is very similar to a lot of the coding platforms that our software engineers will use in their actual jobs. So in order to set up Gitpod, the first thing everyone has to do is add the Gitpod Chrome extension. What that's going to do, it's going to add this Gitpod button to your GitHub and make it super easy for you to create a new project. I will show you where that is, but make sure that you have this extension added, right? And now I'm going to go through this process through the slides, and then I'm actually going to do it live, so you can wait and do this with me after I do it. All right, so you're going to fork the starter code. You're going to click that fork button. And what that does is it makes a copy. So every time we start a new project, we give students starter code that will actually be on the It's Code Nation GitHub. And when you fork the project, you are making a copy of that project so that they're not changing in the It's Code Nation account, they're changing it on their own. And they'll know because their username will be right here. So you should see your username. All right, then you have to make sure that your website is hosted. So we use GitHub Pages, and basically what this does is it gives you a URL that you can share. So in order to do that, you've got to go to the Settings tab. You're going to scroll all the way down to the section called GitHub Pages, which is pretty much at the bottom right before the danger zone. And under Source, you're going to change it from None to Master Branch. Then you're going to click Save. After you do that, if you scroll down again, you'll see like a blue sort of window that says your site is ready to be published at, and then a link. That's the URL for your hosted site. So if they email that to a friend or you or their family, they'll actually see the live site. And they're going to submit their project on the agenda. So they're going to want to submit the live site so you can take a look at it, and also the username for the repo so you can take a look at their code. And then in order to put it in Gitpod, all you have to do is click that Gitpod button, and it will actually open your Gitpod for you. It'll make sure you're logged in, and it will create it for you. All right, so let's do this now. So the first thing I've got to do is fork the starter code. So I'm going to go back to the starter code. You do not actually need to do this project. If you are a returning PM, you may have already done it. But I just want us to practice this one time because this is something that takes a lot of practice, and you're going to have to walk students through it a lot of times. So it's important for you to completely understand this process. So you can see I'm on the It's Code Nation page, and this is the fan page project that was done last year. The first thing I've got to do is I've got to fork the project. If I click fork, you'll see I've already done it. So I'm actually just going to go straight to it. But otherwise, you're going to need to fork it. I'm going to make sure that my name is here. This is my account. And you will see all of the starter code here. This is a repo. All right, this is all of the code that has to do with this project. All right, I want it hosted first, so I'm going to click Settings. I'm going to scroll all the way down to GitHub Pages. See, here's our danger zone. And I've already got it on the master branch. But if yours says none, you're going to click Master Branch. You're going to click Save. And then if you scroll down again, you'll see your site is published at. All right, and this is the link. That's the live site. So this is what everybody on the internet can see. All right, so once you have that link, this is the link that goes into the agenda, and this is the link that goes into the agenda. It'll take you to a Google form where you submit it. All right, so now my site is hosted. I need to pull it into Gitpod. I would click this Gitpod button, but I'm telling you it'll take kind of a long time, so I actually already have opened this. This is what your Gitpod looks like when you open it. See, it's got all your projects in it. And then this is what a project looks like. So again, not too different from Popcode or Repl.it, or if you use Cloud9, you'll see my index.html, you'll see my style.css, which I can open by opening all these things. I've got multiple pages here, like we said. We can link all these together. You can see I've got a JavaScript page, but there's not much on it. The README will be here, and it'll have all the directions for students and places for them to X off while they've done it. You see I've already done this project. And if I want to look at the preview, there's actually a way where I can click right here and it'll show up here. This fan page is my love affair with Houston. And then down here is the terminal. All right, so it looks a lot like the console, but you can actually type in it. You can type in the console, but you would type more frequently in the terminal. And this is where you're going to put your Git commands in order to save your work. So if you just click File, Save in Gitpod, it's going to save it to Gitpod, but it's not going to go back to GitHub, right? It's got to go back onto your GitHub in order to be on your hosted site. So we type some commands here that start with Git in order to save our work. All right, so I'm going to go through this right now. If you are a turning PM, you may have memorized these by now. All right, so at the end of every single class, students have to save, and we call it committing your work. So that means it's going back to your GitHub. And again, this is how you update your live page. So the first thing you've got to do is type in git status. And that basically lets you see what you've actually changed. So you can see here, that means your the index.html and the style.css pages were changed. And if they've got changes there, we want to make sure it goes to the live site. All right, so if you've got changes, the next thing you're going to type is git space add space period. And the period just means we're adding everything. So that means that, like, yes, we understand that there are changes and we want to add them to the staging area, which basically means we want to add them to our GitHub repo. So we're getting ready to do that. If you just stop here, you still have not actually saved anything. All right, after that, you're going to do git space commit space -m space, and then in quotes, you're going to write a comment. All right, the -m stands for message. And basically what you're saying is, like, I am going to name this commit something. So it's almost like a subject line in an email. So you might write in your comment, like, updated HTML or added click handlers or added links. And you're just going to write, like, what you actually did during that day. And that's actually going to get pushed up to your GitHub as well, so that people know what the last thing you changed was. And then finally, you're going to type git space push. And that is what actually saves your work. You'll notice that you do not need to type in your GitHub username or password, which was something that had to happen in Cloud9, and students often forgot their passwords. But this is connected to your GitHub, and you do not need to type in anything. You just need to type git push, and it will save everything to your GitHub. Then you're going to want to check, which means you're going to go to your GitHub profile. And then in the repo, you're going to see this timestamp. So it'll say, ideally, you probably want it to say like 5 seconds ago, and that means that it worked. And you'll also see this is the message that you typed. So this is what the last thing that was changed there. All right, if it does say 2 months or 10 months, that means that the student did not actually git commit correctly, and their changes were not saved. All right, this is the slide that will come up for students at the end of every class. So these are the 4 commands that you will probably memorize shortly, because you'll need to go over it with students every time. All right, so I'm not going to do that live, but you'll see here's my messages. Here I haven't changed anything for a year, but if I did git push, this is what would be here, and it would say like 5 seconds ago. All right, so I know I went through everything really quickly. We will definitely go through Gitpod again, and Carolyn and I are always available to go through Repl.it if you would like to do that as well. I'm going to go back to our independent practice for today and remind you that this is the assignment that is due on Friday, August 16th to Carolyn and I. I will create an assignment in the Google Classroom so that you can submit this. There will be office hours at least once for you to ask any questions, but please feel free to come to me or Carolyn at any point if you have questions. And good luck.